Happy New Year's Eve, heathens! How y'all doing? So today we're gonna go out of this year and into the new year with some mythicism because we're gonna be going over this video.
Now to begin, we have to start out by saying that Christianity cannot be proven scientifically. And there are some who believe that science and religion are totally opposed to each other because science is based on evidence and reason, and religion is based on belief and faith. So are they really opposites? Are people really forced to choose one or the other?
So yes, this guy today is going to be talking about whether or not Christians have blind faith. In the process, he will also be covering the historicity of Jesus and as well as whether or not Jesus was actually the Son of God. So, if mythicism or this particular topic interests you, please stay tuned. Alright, so tonight we're getting into, do Christians have blind faith? So I would like to know from you guys down below in the comments as to whether or not you believe that Christians have blind faith. We are going to be covering this. I would like to know what you think in the comments down below, so please do leave those comments down there. Do you think Christians have blind faith? Me personally, I very much do think they have blind faith. I don't think that they have really any evidence for their faith, but they believe it purely on faith, which would make it blind. That's how I'm arguing it, but let's see how these people take it.
So today we live in a unique age of science and information, and there are some who claim that Christians really need to get with the times because the problem with Jesus Christ's deity and resurrection is that you can't prove them scientifically.
I feel like I know where he's going with this because you can't prove it scientifically. So I feel like he's probably going to go the route of saying, well, science is only observational science and you cannot apply the scientific method to other disciplines. And that other disciplines do not use the scientific method, only those that are based off of like observations now, like for instance radioactive decay or the economy or anything like that. Obviously we can apply the scientific method to things in the past. We do this all the time with like murder cases. We can't go back into the past and know what happened, but what we can do is we can analyze the evidence, create a hypothesis, and see if the evidence supports the hypothesis. That's a brief oversight of how I usually go about it, but I'm not going to speak for him. I'm going to let him go ahead.
And it's true. You can't prove those things scientifically. So Christians must have blind faith. People believed in God back then because they needed help with all their problems and they couldn't explain certain phenomena such as rain or earthquakes. But now that mankind is more advanced, the need for some kind of higher power is gone. Christians just can't accept the fact that old tradition and religions are dying and that we all must adapt to the age of science and technology. So the question we're going to answer today is, do Christians have blind faith?
Okay, so basically he's talking about how do Christians believe things just because their faith tells them to and that there's no evidence to support it. And if you knew anything about Christian theology, you would say, yes, definitely. Like faith is the only way that you can really know Christ. Not even the first century Christians were able to prove that Jesus actually existed on earth. Paul himself says that he got his information from no man, that he only got it from revelation in scripture. So even Paul, one of the first Christians, he said that you couldn't know Jesus existed or know Jesus at all unless you had a revelation from him. It's pretty obvious that blind faith has been at the core of Christianity since the beginning.
Now to begin, we have to start out by saying that Christianity cannot be proven scientifically. And there are some who believe that science and religion are totally opposed to each other.
Yes, science is very toxic to religion because religion requires blind faith, whereas science requires evidence. Just because you don't understand science doesn't mean that science is false.
Because science is based on evidence and reason, and religion is based on belief and faith. So are they really opposites? Are people really forced to choose one or the other?
So let's just consider this for a second. If somebody wanted you to take it on blind faith that something written on a napkin was true without any evidence behind it whatsoever, then, I mean, would you believe it or would you ask for evidence? Because you could pose a hypothesis and you could run tests on whatever the fuck this napkin says. And I mean, you could figure out whether or not it is the truth, because one of the main uses of science is to be able to describe our reality, to know know what is in our reality. It allows us to really detect what is true and what is false. And with religion, you don't get that. You just get, well, here's our holy book. This is why you need to believe things. You have this invisible disease called sin, and we have the answer.
First off, let's look at science and the scientific method.
Awesome. Let's do a crash course on scientific method. Can we have a montage that goes through here with science, spilling all the beakers, doing all the maths, making all of the shit, and making a bunch of bullshit up. Science! Fuck yeah! Science!
Now, the scientific method is a process where people use techniques to gather data and information to draw conclusions. And you have a few basic steps that are generally followed.
Okay, so as he goes through this, like I mean, just with that general overview, I can already tell. I want you to try to put this in a historical kind of context as you listen to him. Like, exactly what is he saying that prevents the scientific method from being used on, like, historical events or whatnot? Now, while we can't directly observe historical events, we can make observations, like, after the fact about it, and we can create hypotheses. So, with the exception of directly observing them and taking observe to mean more of observe the evidence or observe the after effects or observe things that occurred because of that thing. And so just take it like that.
First off, people observe the world around them, which then leads to them having a question about something in particular, and from there they do research, construct a hypothesis or an educated guess, and they conduct experiments or tests to see if their hypothesis is correct.
All right, so now that he's laid this out, like for instance, you can observe that Christians believe that Jesus really existed in history. And you can draw a lot of questions from that. Did Jesus really exist? What is the evidence that supports this whole idea that Jesus existed? So now you got to go into the research phase. You do your research and everything like that on existing information and whatnot. And then the experiment part, of course, it's not like beakers and everything like that. But I mean, you can make hypotheses, which are what experiments are designed to test. You can make these hypotheses about what it would mean if Jesus did exist. And you can test those. And of course, it is a bit more subjective coming from history because you're having to interpret things. You're having to come up with reasons why things are logically this way. But I mean, that's why you also can be peer reviewed. You can ask your friends about it. Does this make sense? You know, what are the holes in this guy? You can do all of these things for history.
After the experiments are done, they analyze the information, and they can either draw a conclusion or do more research and make more hypotheses and conduct more tests. When it comes to proving something scientifically, people must be able to repeat the tests in a controlled environment.
And I mean, you can do that with history. Like, for instance, I've got a hypothesis for how you can determine like what is good historical references or what's good historical evidence. And I've come up with a acronym for it. It's TIE, TIE. That's time, independence, and explanatory power. My hypothesis is that using those three things, I can determine, you know, what evidence is good evidence for a Jesus existing in history. And I can test that against all of the evidence that Christians usually give. See, the problem is that the methods that New Testament scholars and everything like that use, they forego like the critical part of it for the New Testament, because these New Testament scholars, the same evidence, the same criteria for evidence that they use to prove that Jesus existed in history is the same method, quality, and everything to say that Jesus resurrected from the dead. You know, shit on me all you want to, but that just sounds a bit fucky if you ask me.
For example, if the farmer Tommy here is making a hypothesis that corn grows faster than tomatoes, if his environment isn't controlled, then his conclusions may be inaccurate. Both plants must be planted in the same area, be given the same amount of water, and given the same amount of care, because if these things weren't the same, then if the corn did grow faster than the tomatoes, then it may only be because that the corn had better growing conditions or because they got more water, etc. The whole point is that in order to prove something scientifically, people need to be able to repeat tests in a controlled environment.
And you can repeat it for each evidence that there is for Jesus, or any other historical figure that you can think of. I mean, you can repeat these tests, like determining what is reliable. This doesn't have to only be for like cornfields and shit.
And if that's the case, no one will ever be able to prove Jesus' deity or his resurrection simply because you cannot repeat events of the past.
You can't repeat events of the past, but you can use the evidence that you have at hand in order to generate a hypothesis and then test that hypothesis against the available evidence. So while you can't repeat the past, you can use a scientific method on the existing evidence that you have at hand.
What people need to know here is that the scientific method isn't the only way to prove facts.
Like, if you're looking to prove a fact, like a fact being a representation of something that's true in our reality, science is designed to reveal that or to show that or to disprove any non-facts. What is another method? Are you just gonna throw shit at a wall and then draw whatever you think happened into the shit on the wall? Is that what you're gonna do? Or are you just gonna pull some shit out of your ass? Either way, I'm thinking you're flinging shit here.
Let's think about this. Can you scientifically prove that Abraham Lincoln was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth in 1865? Or that George Washington was the first president of the United States? Or that Alexander the Great was mentored by Aristotle? Or that Socrates or Plato even existed?
Well, I think that there's some debate about maybe Socrates or Plato. I can't remember which one. It's up in the air as to whether or not he actually existed. But I would say that like Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, and even Julius Caesar, we can easily prove it because we have evidence at hand and we can analyze the evidence and make a good, educated guess about what happened in the past. Like, in order for Abraham Lincoln to not have been shot by John Wilkes Booth, you would have to come up with explanations as to why we have all of this evidence right now that points to John Wilkes Booth shooting Lincoln, which, another fun fact, extra bonus, today I learned the bodyguard that was supposed to be guarding, Abraham Lincoln's ass was actually an alcoholic, and he had actually stepped away from his post, went to the bar next door to get fucking drunk. Think about that next time you want to go to the bar and get drunk, fucking sinning heathen. You might kill Abraham Lincoln. You don't know. I do. I get drunk at home. I don't get drunk on the job.
No, you can't scientifically prove any of those things.
You can use the scientific method on the evidence that you have at hand.
Because now we're not in the realm of science, we're in the realm of history. People still believe in the existence of Martin Luther King Jr. and Lincoln and Washington, Alexander the Great, Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, right?
Because we have evidence to suggest that they exist. I mean, what are you not getting here? I mean, are you this remedial?
Why? Because they are historically supported. People wrote about them. People recorded their accomplishments, their ideas, and their contributions to mankind. And we have historians who evaluate how trustworthy these recordings are. So
it does not take a lot of brain power to do the work yourself. This just screams argument from authority because they're like, we have these historians that tell us what to trust, and so therefore we trust them. It's not that I'm saying that historians are always wrong. I'm saying that they can be wrong about things. Don't just trust an Abraham Lincoln historian that says that he was abducted by aliens and got his plumbing all splunked by the fucking splunking aliens. You don't have to believe every single historian that comes around. What you have to do is you have to trust the evidence. Like, analyze the evidence for yourself. If the evidence doesn't match what the historians or the experts are saying, then you don't necessarily need to trust it. Like, for instance, there's this one guy that's a mythicist. His name is Atwood. Can't remember his first name. He suggests that the Romans created Jesus Christ in order to control the Jewish population. And that is not supported historically at all, but the guy is a historical scholar. You don't need to trust every single one. Like, don't trust every single mythicist out there. Like, there's Archaea S. I can't remember her real name. She recently died, so I don't mean to shit on her too bad, but she did not have a lot of good research to back up her claim. People generally go after her because she doesn't have this evidence.
When people try to prove something historically, they evaluate oral testimonies and written testimonies, among other things. So can Jesus Christ's existence, deity, and resurrection be proven scientifically?
I'm going to say no. The chances of something supernatural like that happening are slim to none, so you would need a lot of evidence in order to support it. But if you had the evidence, you could definitely prove it scientifically. He's using an equivocation fallacy with the words scientific or scientifically, because there's observational science and then there's science, like just the scientific method. And you can apply that in an observational kind of setting, but you can also apply it to other situations. You can apply the scientific method to almost every area of your life, because science is meant to show you reality.
Absolutely not. Why? Because you can't repeat history, and it would be foolish to try to.
Okay, true, you can't repeat history, but again, I say that you can test the evidence that history has given us.
But you can support Jesus' existence historically. A lot of people say that Jesus is just a myth, a fable, a fairy tale, but you can look and see that Jesus' life is supported by thousands of manuscripts and his biographies were claimed to have been based on eyewitnesses that interacted with Jesus himself.
Oh man, this is so hilarious. I just had to address this on my debate with the Christian anarchist. This is perfect. Could be the reason why I picked the fucking video. So he says that they are based on eyewitnesses of people that saw Jesus. This is false. The closest person that you have is Paul. He's not even the gospel. Mark, he kind of has a Pauline kind of feel to his gospel, but Mark is the earliest gospel that we have, written in 70 AD. I'm not going to suppose exactly where this guy's getting his bullshit from, okay? I will say that the only evidence to suggest that the Gospels were written by first-hand accounts of people that either knew Jesus or saw Jesus or sucked Jesus's dick was Papias. Papias is not a legit historian. He reports things that he just hears because, in his own words, he trusts hearsay more than books. Papias does sound like he'd suck dick. Thank you, KC, for pointing out his dick-sucking ways. So that's Papias. He says that Mark was actually an assistant to Peter, and so Mark wrote down the information from Peter. But there's a lot of problems with that, and just to go over a couple here. For one thing, Peter was very Torah observant, while Mark, the Gospel of Mark at least, is very not Torah observant. It's moving past the Torah. Peter would have been writing in Hebrew or Aramaic, while Mark was written in Greek. And I don't think that Mark would have written in Greek while his guy was speaking in Greek or Aramaic.
In fact, the New Testament of the Bible has about 24,000 manuscripts supporting it. So
what? Where the fuck does this come from? There are no 24,000 manuscripts. At best, you could count the Nag Hammadi library, which has, you know, like P52 and other partial manuscripts, like just little nibbles of it that still exist. But I mean, there's not like 24,000 in the Nag Hammadi that corroborates what Mark was saying. So I don't know where he's getting his 24,000 from. My guess is that since he's probably more than likely using Papias, he just kind of heard the number being thrown out there and he's like, oh, that sounds like a perfect number. Fuck yeah! Jesus! Fuck yeah! Wait, I wouldn't do devil horns for Jesus, would I? Jesus! Fuck yeah!
It's not like the claims of the Bible are empty claims. It's recorded that Jesus was born in Bethlehem, which is located in Israel, which are real places that you could visit today. On top of that, Jesus' life is mentioned by people who lived during Jesus' time who weren't even Christians, like Tacitus, Josephus, and Pliny the Younger. And if people try to
So let me get this straight. Okay, so the two arguments here. Places in the Bible actually exist, therefore Jesus does. And then he doesn't know when Tacitus, Josephus, or Pliny even lived. And he's saying that they lived during the time of Jesus. The most conservative you could get for any of these fucks that are listed up there is that I think Josephus was born in like 55 and the rest were born much later. So no, they weren't born or living during the time of Jesus. All of these three people like mention a Christ person. Josephus, though, is a forgery. Tacitus, I do believe that there's a lot of contention around him. There's not a lot of evidence until the 4th century that particular passage even existed in the current way that it does. Most likely it's a interpolation in it because it's the E and the I look very similar and you can't really tell them in the script. So it more than likely was Christians, because Suetonius about 10 years earlier was talking about Chrestus, who was instigating the Jews and whatnot. So it makes sense that he would have been talking about Chrestus then. Also, Tacitus would have been getting his information from Pliny. Pliny the Younger had to interrogate Christians in order to figure out what they believed. Now, if Christians or Christ or anything like that had existed during the time of Jesus, then Pliny the Elder would have noticed and he would have written about them. But guess what? Fucker didn't. And so Pliny the Younger, being a relative of Pliny the Elder, didn't know anything about him. Legit. Every source that you have put up there, along with the shitty argument that Jerusalem existed, so therefore Jesus did, is bullshit.
Deny all of these pieces of evidence of Jesus' life, then they would also need to reject the evidence that we have for other figures in ancient history.
Well, no, you don't have to reject the evidence for other people. I mean, you would apply the same scrutiny to those other sources. We don't get the same level of disingenuous method that we do with other characters, other figures in history than we do with Jesus. Like the methods that they use and the reasons why they accept things as proof that Jesus did actually exist are suspect. Because like with Tacitus, they're like, oh, Tacitus mentions Christ. Tacitus correlates his previous information with first-hand sources, so therefore he must have gotten this from a first-hand source. When in actuality, it could have been an interpolation because of the different circumstances, but also Pliny the Younger could have informed him about Christians. So it's not impossible that he didn't get it from a first-hand source of like Jesus Christ.
So when we ask the question, do Christians have blind faith? The simple answer to that would have to be no.
Yes, totally disagree with this. You do have blind faith, good sir.
Because their claims to Jesus' existence is based on history, manuscript evidence, and eyewitness testimony.
No, it's not. There's no eyewitness testimony for Jesus Christ. You even have Bart Ehrman, who's a historicist for Jesus. He even says that no, there's no first century account of Jesus Christ. I know that there's a quote out there from him about that, but he still doesn't doubt that Jesus actually existed.
So we have Jesus' existence supported, but do we have reason to believe in Jesus' deity and resurrection?
Well, I mean, all you have is the Bible, so I'm guessing that you're going to go with yes.
Go ahead and check out our videos defending Jesus' deity and resurrection. And if you have any questions, thoughts, suggestions, or if you just want to say hi, leave a comment below. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your friends.
Please do like and share and subscribe and everything like that right now, or Jesus will come down and fuck you in the ass real hard. You understand me? Jesus wants you to share it, and you got to share it 10,000 times in order to get all your bills paid and shit. I like how this particular thing started off as like, do Christians have blind faith? And then they proved, in their eyes, they proved the historicity of a Jesus, right? But that doesn't answer the original question. I mean, do you think? I don't think that they did either, because they don't actually prove how they don't have blind faith that Jesus is the Son of God, that he is the way, the truth, the life. Like, all of that only comes from the Bible. Like, even if you give people the idea of a Jesus existing at that time, even if you give them that, you haven't proved his divinity. So unless you can, like, historically or scientifically prove his divinity, you haven't actually proved that you're not working off blind faith. Because at that point, you are working off blind faith. You just got a book that tells you, yeah, that motherfucker did marvelous works. He healed a blind man with spit and dirt. Can you do that? I don't think so. Only Jesus can do that. I will not spit in the eye of a blind person and rub dirt in it and get them to see. That's just ridiculous shit. It's for science. Thank you, heathens, for making it to the end. Have you left your comment down below with whether or not Christians have blind faith or not? If not, go down there right now and leave me a comment. While you're down there, make sure you smash that like button and subscribe if you like this kind of mythicist content. Don't forget to stand up and use your voice, and I will see you heathens next year.